Good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're tuning in. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of IESE Expert Series. With us today we have, well, a friend, a colleague, and a bit of a celebrity, Nigel Paine. Nigel has been CLO in his past. He's been teacher in his past. He's been author in his past, all of which he still sort of pursues in different moments of his year to this day. And he was also my mentor and my professor in a program that I went through, the Penn CLO. So it's particularly a pleasure, both personal and institutional, to welcome Nigel, who's with us today. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Peppe. That's very kind of you.
So as we've done in the past in today's session as well, we're really just going to have a chat. Nigel has seen a lot of the evolution of our industry, learning and development, specifically in terms of executive development over the recent years. And so it's just a chat meant to pick his brain a little bit in terms of what's going on and some of the trends that he sees. I'll have some questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience for you to share. So Nigel, let's start a little bit with learning as a sort of a function, no? And back when you were CLO of the BBC, learning was struggling to have a seat at the table. And I'm sure you had many similar conversations in your days. Today, if you read the headlines, it seems that it has finally gotten that seat. It's sort of at least being described as on the CEO agenda, essential to organizational survival. Is that true? If it's true, why is it true?
Thank you, Peppe. Just to start off, just a bit of context, that it's 30th anniversary soon of Personnel Today magazine, and they're looking around they're doing a whole section on learning, the evolution of learning, and they're looking around for people who have been there for those 30 years. And I was embarrassed and slightly devastated to learn that I'm top of the list. So I'm going to be taking the trajectory back 30 years shortly. So I find that more embarrassing than flattering, I have to say. Anyway, that what you're saying is right, but it's wrong as well. That in many ways, that old chestnut, that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. I think progress in L&D is here, but it's not evenly distributed. So that I still get people asking me, how do I get my CEO to listen? How do I get anyone in the C-suite to take any notice of all the work that we're doing in L&D? So there are still organizations back where we were maybe 10 or 20 years ago, but the direction of travel is absolutely clear. And in the current climate, a CEO who doesn't see the value of engaging his or her workforce and engaging them around learning is slightly crazy, I would say. So the music has changed. And it's changed not because people have woken up and suddenly had a change of heart, a revelation in the night. It's happening because the outside environment is changing so rapidly, things are so volatile, that the only way to survive is to increase the volume and the velocity of learning, for sure. I'm absolutely certain of that.
So I guess, paraphrasing your words a little bit, is learning a sort of way to cope up with constant change? I mean, is the coping with the external environment really a learning challenge? Is that what's going on?
It's not only a learning challenge, but it's massively a learning challenge. Now, how do we survive as human beings? We cope in our environment, from children to adults, by learning, and yet somehow that got disengaged, disconnected in the organizations we worked in, and we expected basically nothing to change, or change was an incredibly big, difficult issue that was more fought against than accepted. I think we've got to have a place where change is not special. You don't have change programs. Change is the absolutely fundamental reality, and the way that people get comfortable with change is being comfortable in their knowledge that they can cope, that they can learn, that they can develop and move forward. So I think it's an increasingly valuable part of that whole business agenda, essentially.
If you put yourself back then, since you're going to have to do that, no, in the shoes of the CLO, imagine you're taking over an organization today. You know, what would be different, and specifically in terms of executives and the way they learn? Would you think of that learning happening in a different way today than it was, say, when you were in charge of the ship?
I think so. When I was in charge of the ship, it was still doing something to somebody, and doing something to somebody en masse. So it was all about numbers, volume, standardization. Exactly the opposite today. It's all about helping people do something to themselves. It's all about personalization, and it's all about allowing people to move at their own pace and own speed, but keep the pressure on them to build their own personal, individualized learning agenda. So you're focusing on different things. When I was running a big learning operation, we had 525 staff and a budget of about maybe $90 million US, something like that. So not the biggest in the world, but it was a significant operation. A lot of it was about control. Now a lot of it is about relinquishing control and getting over yourself and not seeing that the learning operation is learning. The learning operation is the facilitator for learning happening all over the place, popping out of the wall and bouncing up from anywhere. So if I was doing it today, I'd have a totally different approach.
But surely one of the prerequisites of that sort of dream, if you will, coming true is the learner themselves, in the sense of this appetite to learn, this lifelong learning desire.
Yes.
Isn't that the most difficult nut to crack in a way?
It depends. It is difficult in the sense that you're taking people who have never had that on their agenda. But if you're working with younger people coming into the workforce, it's the easiest thing in the world because that's what they want. There's a very interesting article in Harvard Business Review last week from Facebook, along with our favorite organization, Wharton Business School, looking at why people leave Facebook. And the old chestnut is that people leave their boss, they don't leave their jobs. When Facebook started to do the investigation, what they found was it's exactly wrong. People leave Facebook because of their jobs. And the main issue is the jobs cease to be challenging, they cease to help people grow, and they cease to help them learn. And at that point, they vote with their feet. And I think there's a wave of people coming into organizations who feel just that kind of learning is my right, that's the only way I'm going to stay employed. For people who are more resistant, all you've got to do is just create the right kind of environment that allows learning to happen in a very straightforward, simple way. It can happen in small bites, it can happen in communion and community. It doesn't have to be you have to sit in front of a computer screen and press return 700 times a week to call that a learning operation. It's the exact opposite in a way. So no, I think it's becoming less and less a big issue or a difficult nut to crack.
And so the other thing is, in a way, then the job of the CLO, which was traditionally confined to kind of the L&D function, if you will, expands beyond that, right? Because to do the learning that you're suggesting, or let's say to facilitate the learning that you're suggesting, it's not just a responsibility that can be confined within the L&D function. It requires technology, it requires marketing, it requires talent management, right? It's a much broader agenda, isn't it?
Yeah. I would never take a job in learning that didn't go across the whole employee life cycle, from acquisition through to leaving. So you need to be involved at every stage, and you need partnerships with all of the major parts of the operation. You need to be really right into the business. You need to understand what drives the organization critically, and you need to be able to use the technology infrastructure, and you need to be a voice in shaping that technology infrastructure, and you need to have the ear of the CEO. So you understand and you can direct the way in which problems are formulated, because for every problem there's a financial dimension and there's a people dimension, and you've got to be in charge of the people dimension, and you've got to be in charge of the values and the way the organization looks at itself. So it's a much bigger job, and the most successful people in learning don't just sit in learning, and many of their jobs go very much more broadly than that. And organizations that try and restrict learning to a very narrow definition of learning are going to be increasingly less successful than those that take a broader view. So you're spot on, Peppe. I agree with you.
So let's talk a little bit about tech, which I know you you like, and you have a chapter on that in one of your recent books. And so, do you get the sense that you know, we are falling into the same old trap of jumping on gadgets or bright, you know, new tools.
Bright shiny things.
Yes, bright shiny things, which has been one of the, you know, complaints, you know, with regards to HR for many years, right? We've been there, done that. These booms and busts. Is that happening again, or are people finally starting to actually look at the meaning behind certain things, the use, and make sense of it in a different way?
In some ways, the great issue now is that there isn't one big thing that's going to solve all the problems, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. There is no LMS that can solve all your learning problems, and probably solve fewer and fewer of them. There's no one piece of tech that works, and we live in a world where the vast majority of the workforce walk into their office in the morning with a supercomputer in their pocket and you know, a massively powerful tablet in their bag, and they sit in front of highly complex technology, which includes cameras and audio and video and all of that stuff. So therefore, what you're trying to do is not look for some miraculous answer to your problems, but galvanize what actually exists and make what exists function in the name of learning and not function in the name of all the other things. So I think the direction of travel, again, I've mentioned that before, the direction of travel is good at the moment. We're moving in the right direction, and I hope that the vast majority of people can resist the people who say this is the one thing you need. There is no one thing you need. You need lots of different things all working in harmony, driven mostly by the user. They're the ones who are in control now, increasingly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And yet, you know, we often still fall into this trap as well of pitting kind of the new versus the old. Now, you grew up in the good old brick and mortar world. Obviously, IESE has a big investment in that world. You know, far too often, though, we want to, you know, take the new and throw out the old. Can you make a case as to why that's wrong, and perhaps, you know, a mix is more warranted?
Because whenever we've done that, whenever we've looked at single dimension solutions, it's never worked. And when we start to incorporate the best of what exists with the best of what's new, you end up with something much more dramatic and exciting. So, for example, there are very good reasons why putting people together in a room can be a fantastic experience, because it's much more visceral and emotional. You can see, feel, touch, you know, smell, maybe not too much, but you get a sense of people in a way that you can never do remotely. And if you've had a face-to-face experience, it makes everything else, all the more remote technology-driven experiences, much more tangible and much more effective. So it's working out how you can do the best of what exists now with the best of what's new. And the problem is, we look at the old bricks and mortar, how wonderful that was. But a lot of the time, we brought people halfway across the world, sat them in rows, told them not to talk to each other, and faced a screen in front, which was endlessly droning on with PowerPoint presentations that you could have done sat at home in wherever you came from. Yeah. So I think it's the best of the old, not the old per se. But more and more, everything is mixed up. And I remember once, Peppe, we had a big argument about leadership, and you were saying that's the one area that you can't get rid of, the importance of face-to-face. But we're seeing it all over the place now. We're seeing that face-to-face is incredibly precious and expensive, and therefore we use it in very small amounts, but we use it intensely. We really get the best out of it, and then we can do all sorts of other things at a much cheaper cost, and make the whole learning experience really powerful. So it's just working out, analyzing carefully what are the elements of the old we can afford to and we wish to take forward, not just assuming that the old model was the one that we have to replicate. And we've come unstuck by taking old models and displacing those models and putting them into a new delivery system. And therefore you end up with people sitting in front of screens, thousands all distributed, not talking to each other, just facing endless PowerPoint, just as they did in the old training rooms. Neither were particularly successful. So it's a bit of imagination is required. But we've got the technology now to be unbelievably imaginative, to do extraordinarily powerful things, and really excite people, make learning not just dreary and necessary, but a joy, basically, a part of your life that is a pleasure and something that you really want to build into your working week, not something that you have to squeeze in under sufferance and under duress.
Yeah, you made me think of the replicating analog experiences in the digital world, right? You don't want to do
exactly.
that. You need to go
no,
beyond.
You do not want to do that.
Right,
exactly. That's old thinking, and old thinking just won't cut the mustard now. You need new thinking, and it's just a waste of all the money you've got in technology if you just build the analog world. You basically, what you're doing if you do that is you import your problems and you put your problems in the new world. You don't solve your problems first and then start off afresh. Yeah. It's really important that point is heavily made and underlined.
Yeah. So I want to invite anyone who's online who'd like to contribute a question to please do so via the chat. I'll just continue on until somebody does, and then get Nigel to answer what's on my mind. Look, Nigel, in your book, Building Leadership Development Programs at Work, you highlight some of the key areas for successful leadership development. There it is, fantastic. Which when I read it, and I don't want to to sound critical. No, some of the things you read, and it's sort of like, this is intuitive. We've been saying this for a long time, and yet you give so many examples of how that is just not happening. How people are struggling, how it remains challenging for L&D folks or just learning professionals in general to achieve impact, to actually have reasonable objectives relative to their company strategy. What's going on? Why is some of this simple stuff so difficult to do?
I think one of the problems with leadership in particular is that everybody owns it, that or senior leaders are leaders. They think they know better, and if they have no great respect for the learning organization, what they expect is something unbelievably conventional. So they try and pull back from innovation and insist on the same old, which simply doesn't work. So one of the in my book there are kind of my C's and my D's, and one of my C's is confront reality. If you want to convince leadership that what is working now is actually broken, they have to see it viscerally with their own eyes and almost feel with their own hands the impact of poor leadership in their organization. They have to understand what it's like to be working somewhere in the middle or the lower half of a place and feel how bad it is and how poor and inconsistent the leadership is. And if you get that and you build a position of trust, what the leader should be saying is, this is broken, fix it, and I trust you to fix it well, rather than it's broken and I'll tell you what to do. Or worse, it's broken, you've got 3 weeks, give me a leadership program. And that happens more often than you can imagine, where organizations want instant fixes. And going back and saying, you can't fix poor leadership in 3 weeks, they don't want to hear that answer. Give me someone who can give me that answer. And there are plenty of organizations out there who, if you said, look, we've got appalling leadership, can you fix it in 3 weeks? Will say, give me the money, just give me the money. It won't, but they will take it. So there's a whole dialogue going on where you confront reality and you do leadership in context. That's my other C. The big problem is that there's this belief that we live in context, yet for some bizarre reason, we can sit in a generic leadership program which has got no reference at all to the world that the individual works in, and someone is saying, this is leadership development. Of course it isn't. It needs context. It's leadership in a particular place, leadership in a particular circumstance, in a particular organization, with a particular culture. Leadership desperately, desperately needs context. And the other C is, it's about co-creation. You don't do this to people, you do it with them. And if you can co-create, if you've got enough people, if you've got a coalition of people who realize how bad it is, some of those people will work with you to make it better. So co-create and curate. Don't hand it over and create stuff independently of the organization without context and imagine that's going to do anything apart cost you a lot of money. It's actually not going to work. Yeah. So, it's getting people to listen and understand and and then the organization to trust the people who know what they're doing, to let them get on and do it and not kind of interfere. Leadership is a great area where people interfere, and it drives me crazy. There's a point where they've just got to trust.
But these people you're referring to, I guess, are the powers that be in organizations. No, so you teach on the Penn CLO program.
Yes.
Where I was a student. You teach CLOs, and you
yes.
talk with many CLOs then in your research as you write your books. So are these people? I mean, I know this is going to sound very harsh, but are they up to the task? Where is the problem? Is it on the CLO side, or is it on the C-suite side that is just not listening?
It's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I don't think you can blame CLOs, but sometimes if you're a CLO and you've got the C-suite on your back, pulling in Harvard is dead easy, and right. They'll love to have it, or Wharton, but it's not going to work if you're not profoundly involved in setting the context and working out what you actually need. It's kind of a quick and cheap it's not cheap, a quick and expensive way out. And that's the problem. It's quick fixes. That I think you've got to buy time, and you've got to have the courage to say to the C-suite, this is a 6 or 9 month journey. You've got to be with us on that. And also, you are a critical part of it. But one of the fundamental pieces that came out of my book, fundamental pieces of research, was that if you have not got the CEO with you, if he or she does not model the behavior you're trying to create, kiss it goodbye, because no one's going to take a blind bit of notice. So you can't have a C-suite that abnegates responsibility, but at the same time, they've got to kind of live, they've got to model and live the future, and then get out of the way in terms of how you deliver that and develop that through the rest of the organization. So it's a bit of blame on both sides, really, rather than say it's all their fault or all their fault.
Mm-hmm. No, and it might be that the context has just come to help us in a way, if we put ourselves on the CLO side, in the sense that this rapid, constant, continuous change, it being in large part a learning challenge, has all of a sudden made learning rise to the forefront. Whether we want to call it learning or agile or adaptive or whatever, but the capability to keep pace is in the hands of the individuals in your organization, and not necessarily the function that is supposed to send them to do stuff.
If you like, the heat is up, is increasing to the point where people are willing to try new things and see the world in a different way. And what worked 5 years ago no longer works. And that's a fantastic opportunity. Someone said, never let a crisis go to waste. And this is, we're in crisis mode, and you can turn that into real radical change and rebuilding leadership in an organization. And it's necessary. We don't do this because it's a nice idea or it's for the good of the soul. We do it because we're trying to help organizations survive, not just thrive or make them go from great to wonderful. We're doing it to help them survive, because it is so difficult to work out what next steps are. And all the old models of deep strategy for 2 years ahead, or always based on certainty, and leaders offering concrete and clear guidelines and roadmaps, all of that's out the window. Yeah. So you've got leadership who've got to be able to say, I haven't a clue, in the nicest possible way, or help me, I don't see how we can think our way through this. Or what are you noticing that I'm not noticing? because of my position and your position. All of those new questions and new experiences have to be incorporated in. So the idea of the knowing everything, all-wise leader is like kind of suicide at the moment. That is how you go out of business, when a handful of people think they know everything.
Yeah. So Nigel, let's end the last few minutes on a couple of quick personal questions here. Some from the audience. People want to know, how does Nigel Payne practice what he preaches in terms of your personal learning environment? You know, what are your references? Where do you get your input from, and so on?
Look, the key for me, and for everybody who's listening, is that you've got to have a network. You know, but I have a network of people whom I respect, and I hope at least have some respect for me, and that I rely on them to feed me stuff, to suggest things that I should be talking about, reading, thinking about, so that I'm constantly connected, and I find that incredibly powerful. On my own, not so good. You know, I've got my own agenda, but that agenda is richly informed by a network of people who know different things in different parts of the world, and it's a big international network. It doesn't rely on the UK or just on the US. You know, it includes important people, or people I think are important, from virtually every corner of the world, and not just learning people as well. I like talking to people who are outside learning, who are talking about their experience of work and what it means and how they're trying to adjust to the current climate. So that's really how I do it. And I'm one of the messiest learners in the history of the universe. You know, I don't learn neatly, systematically. I learn in bits. I get insights and fragments. It's the way I write. And you know, I happen to use Evernote, but Evernote is my outsourced brain. So Evernote is full of little notes that I've made that I tag, and that eventually they will come back and form something coherent. But at the time, that's interesting. I need to know about that. I don't know where to park it. It's not neat. So I just fling it into Evernote, and I know that at least I'll be able to find it again when I need it.
Give us a little snapshot. What are you working on now? What's your current sort of?
I'm 3/4 of the way, maybe a little bit more, through my next book. My next book is on learning culture and learning organizations, because that hasn't really had much credence for the last 20 years, and I think it's very important. You know, and my central insight really is, and I'm going to give it to you now so you don't even have to read the book. The central insight is that learning is like a corporate gyroscope. So that unlike other, learning culture is slightly separate from organizational culture. And if it's working well, it allows the organization to constantly align and stay level. When the world is changing, it's learning that will keep the organization on track. So it becomes a kind of powerful corporate gyroscope. And you know, if you're flying, as we are, or we're all flying at the moment, the idea that you could have a plane without a gyroscope would be unthinkable. And I think increasingly to have an organization without a learning gyroscope will be unthinkable. So learning is going to get more important, not less important, over the coming years. I'm absolutely certain of that. And having an organization which is not just about individuals, it's where the organization learns, and the organization keeps itself facing in the right direction, and people in the organization just learn from the fact they're surrounded by other people who are learning. There are places where they can find out, places where they can share. It's really important. Someone talked in that article about Facebook, they talked about everybody needs an expert database. And that is basically, that's not things, it's people. They need a group of people who they can rely on to take them up to the next level. And that's where learning will go. It will help people themselves maintain their career and maintain their expertise, but it will keep organizations facing in the right direction and not kind of facing in the opposite direction or wobbling too much. So that's the insight from the book.
Or the cliff. Well, Nigel, hey, it's been really a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy agenda to join us, and thanks for all of you guys who've been online following through. Nigel Payne, a pleasure, and hope to see you soon, sir.
Thank you so much, Peppe. It's been a great chance to talk. I really value it. We should do it more often.
Absolutely. Thanks. Bye-bye.